and welcome to another edition of From the Bookshelf. The premise of our program is very basic and simple. We believe that careful reading and careful discussion of well-crafted writing provides an opportunity for all individuals and groups of people to gather a deeper insight into some of the complex issues of life. Reading is an art form because writing is the intensity of a person that allows that individual to express what he or she is really feeling and thinking for themselves. The format of our program is also very basic. Each time that we gather, I bring to the table a book, or perhaps a book or two, to present the thesis, the main idea. And then, with someone with me, we provide conversation that will hopefully allow the viewer to understand what the book is about, or what the books are about. Today we're talking about what I call, in my phrase, the Joshua cycle. That is to say, the first book that we're talking about was entitled Joshua, and then came Joshua and the Children, in a series of books over 15 years by a particular author that, well, this author is trying to develop a central theme and issue. Before we get into the book, let me introduce my guests for today, Father Tim Kelleher. Welcome, Tim.
Okay.
Joseph Girzone is the author's name. He's retired from active parish ministry in the Catholic Church. He served in a few parishes in the area northwest of Albany, New York. And when he began writing the series that I've been calling the Joshua cycle, he began to present to the readers, you might call parables, stories, ways in which we could identify with some serious issues, but see it in real practical terms. I'd like to ask Father Tim right now to talk to us a bit about his own early impressions when he first encountered perhaps these books, and how he saw the real benefit of, well, people like ourselves active in the church, but also people who perhaps are just ordinary citizens who can pick up a book like Joshua and gain from it. Father Tim, what's your impression of the Joshua cycle?
I was first given the book Joshua shortly after it had been printed, and it was given to me by a friend of mine, and I must admit I left it on the shelves for 3 years because it wasn't anything that sparked an interest. And when I picked it up 3 years later, I couldn't put it down. And it's so simple, but yet it's extremely powerful. And for me, what Joe Girzone has done is that he's presented Jesus in 20th century surroundings, and I can only think that the person of Jesus walking the earth 2,000 years ago presented the similar challenges that this character of Joshua does. It makes you look at some of your lifestyle or manners in which you live your life, things you take for granted as being the right thing to do or the way to do things. It makes you evaluate a lot of things in the context of the gospel message. So for me anyways, Joshua presented a very simple but a profound challenge.
Did you find, I know in my own case, working with young people in the church and perhaps occasionally running a program, that as I'm planning something, in the back of my mind I said, here's how this person in this book did something that was very effective.
Mm-hmm.
And have you found that perhaps even in homilies or preaching or funerals that some of these techniques that he used were helpful to you?
Definitely. I think that the person of Joshua, again, enfleshes the message of Christ, and you can't help but think of the way Joshua would have handled it, because in my mind anyways, this person of Joshua, this character of Joshua, is the person of Christ. And so it's bringing the gospel into everyday surroundings. And he's living the gospel in everyday situation. So it's not so much what he says, although that's part of it, but it's more the way in which he lives his life, the simplicity of his lifestyle, recognizing the beauty of every individual, trying to, as Jesus did in the scriptures with Mary Magdalene and Peter, trying to bring each one's uniqueness and giftedness to the forefront so the person understands it as well as others can recognize it. Many people would consider the person of Joshua controversial, but I guess for me, as I've been thinking about it, Jesus 2,000 years ago was controversial because basically he's presenting things that really do make you search into your own lifestyle, or make you question different positions that you've taken, or maybe it brings you to a point of reassessing a position or whatever. And I think sometimes the controversy is in the fact that we don't want to do that. We've become complacent and somewhat we've accepted it, and we don't really want to be challenged.
Maybe also we like to have people like us.
That's
Meaning,
true.
when I say like us, we like to have people say, that was nice, I enjoy what you said. And it's a tendency, I think, maybe sometimes on my part, to look for people who might say, what you said made perfect sense, so in trying to anticipate what I should say, you kind of avoid the hard issues. And what you end up with is maybe plain vanilla.
That's right. That's right.
That's the hard part.
Right.
In some of his other books, Joshua and the Children, but then a book called The Shepherd, which relates more of organizational difficulties and more controversy perhaps. But again, the thesis, as I remember it, is that let's see if these institutions which are moving apart can come back together again. And there's a wonderful challenge for 20th century religions.
That's right.
To come together.
That's right. And I guess it's a vision, it's a hope, it's a dream, whatever. I think it's important to say that Joseph Girzone never denies any of the teachings of the Catholic Church. He may question some of the ways these teachings are lived, and I think that's okay. I think we all need to be challenged, but he never denies anything that the Catholic Church professes as being the truth. But it does make you look at the way different churches have interrelated over the years, and what is it that separates the different churches and causes problems within families or within communities. And again, he presents a vision.
The vision is interesting because, as you mentioned, perhaps coming from one other place to Walpole and Blessed Sacrament and being here for a while, and as I've read some of the other books that Girzone has written, and especially his latest one called Joey, one gets a glimpse into his own personal journey. First assigned as a young parish priest and moving to another parish, becoming a pastor, assuming more responsibility. And I think that's a nature that you yourself, I'm sure, have personally experienced, that as the diocese, as the bishop asks you to take on a different assignment, move here, move there, your own vision of what is happening, I'm sure, enlarges. And then it must be, maybe you could share with us a bit of a problem in a sense, because as you are there in a parish, let's say, working with other priests and with a pastor who's giving you direction, and so you have a perspective on life. And then as you become the pastor, now perhaps the scene looks a little different.
Oh yeah, it does become different. I think that one of the things that I've learned over the 26 years that I've been ordained is that in meeting people, and this is certainly presented by Joshua and certainly in the scriptures, that Jesus always met each individual where they were at, and that's so important. And obviously as pastor or as priest, one of my major concerns is to help the individuals, first of all, come to a recognition that they're loved by God and that God wants what's best for them. And Joshua enfleshes the person of Jesus in doing that. He never condemns anybody, is never judgmental of anybody, but undoubtedly wants the person to come to a sense of fulfillment, a sense of peace, a sense of contentment. And I guess as I relate with people in the individual parishes, this is what I want for them. And I guess as being pastor, you move beyond that in the sense you still want the individual, but you have a vision for a larger group of people, and you want all peoples to come to relationship with God, to recognize how God has gifted them, and to enable them to pool these resources so that they can establish a sense of community in the people of God. And I guess when I see the person of Joshua present this in his lifestyle, he does it in such a simple fashion, and I realize that it's a parable. He does it in such a simple fashion, but somehow or other, I think we as adults can make things a lot more complicated than they really are. That we can carry some baggage into the present, that we can make issues out of things that really shouldn't be issues, and that they cause different camps and divisions. And I think if we could focus on God and what God is asking each one of us to do, which is obviously what Joshua does, that a lot of these barriers that we've established would be broken down, and that we could come to a deeper sense of being the people of God. I've been very gifted over the years to have been associated with good priests and with good pastors, and certainly by their dedication and by their ways in which they lived out their faith, I think I've been very gifted in that fashion.
What strikes me too is that I think in reading books like this, thinking about what this author, this priest, Father Joe Girzone, has done and is doing with the stories about Joshua, that you and I and others change. Because the effect of good writing is not so much as just to say that was a nice story, but what does it mean to how I continue to live my life a little differently, perhaps. As reading the gospel or reading Joe Girzone's books, somehow, bit by bit, we become a little different in our approach to life. Have you seen, perhaps as someone recommended it to you, gave it to you, you put it on the shelf, came back to it, perhaps you've recommended these books to other people. Have you seen when you've done that and they've gone off and read the books that they themselves perhaps have become a little different in their approach, or is it not so discernible?
In some cases where I've been in continuous contact with the person, I guess I could say that I've seen a difference. In Joshua's enfleshing the person of Jesus, it brings faith to a sense of life. Joshua is somebody that's very easy to relate to because it's in a 20th century surrounding. The person of Jesus is obviously one to relate to as well, but Jesus is obviously 2,000 years removed. And so this characterization or this parable of Jesus is putting it into present day category. And I think that, and you see the reaction to Joshua in the various stories, I think it, at least for me, and I've seen this in other people too, it causes one to try to listen to the message and not shut the message off because of the messenger. And I guess as I've been thinking about these books and thinking about in terms of the scriptures, it was so easy for people at the time of Jesus to not listened to him by calling him a drunkard and a glutton. And they also did that with John the Baptist. They called him crazy. And I guess once we've categorized people in a negative sense, we don't have to listen to them. And so I think when we turn the person of Joshua off, if we do in our mind, it's because we're categorizing and we're not listening to the message, because his message is very much rooted in the Scriptures. And so I guess in answer to your question, I guess I've seen people be enabled to make that transition from the Scriptures to a present-day situation.
Where they're at, yeah,
Right.
yeah. Gee, so many times in situations that I've been in, talking to people about perhaps preparing their children for baptism or preparing themselves to, as parents, to be involved in the sacrament, and they begin to talk about their own personal history. And so many times people have difficulty with what we call this baggage or this personal history and negative effects of what has happened. And somehow it comes down to, as you mentioned, like the messenger. The message may have been okay, but it got garbled because for them, in the person of the messenger, somebody in grade school or somebody in high school or somebody in the rectory who was talking to them, they came away with a personal frustration, and the message was all gobbled up.
Right.
And I think that's wonderful the way that these books can maybe give us a different aspect, that the message is always much more important than who we are.
That's right.
But so how do we continue to do that? That's I think that's our challenge.
That's right.
I know in one case, kind of a habit of mine, if you will, or almost a hobby, is seeing, and I'm sure you do the same thing, you see a book like this and you may lend it to somebody and it's lost, but that's okay because now somebody else is using it to advantage. And occasionally I may, as I did with his most recent book, he wrote this book called Joey a short time ago, which is almost autobiographical. I say almost because I don't think it's what he intended to do, but it comes across that way. But this book, Joey, struck me as being so poignant about a relationship with an older person and a young person, and how, as each of them walks a journey of life, how they come closer together and can help each other. So in the very beginning, this boy, Joey, is a few years old. And so Father Girzone is able to impart the wisdom of the ages, like he knows everything, the kid knows a little. But as they're now 19 and maybe 50, they're both adults and able to talk to each other. And that's an amazing part of that story. When I finished reading it, I was also in touch with a friend of mine who was going through and is still going through a difficult time. And I don't know why exactly, but I said, this might help. So bought a copy of the book, I gave it to my friend. And I think the amazing thing, which you can also share with us, is that these books, maybe they're a couple hundred pages, but you can read them in an evening. I mean, it's really quite simple in that sense, but they're very powerful. So I said to my friend, you may find a few minutes and sample the book. And the next day he said, I couldn't put it down. That's what everybody says, you know. You begin to read the story, and the story catches you, and I think that's the benefit of the story.
Right, exactly.
We're thinking, too, and I'm thinking about these books and the effect of these books. We'd also like to share with the listeners, I think, an event that's coming up, and you know more about it than I do because you've been involved with the organization of it and so forth. But in a few weeks, Father Girzone will be here in the Walpole area. And he's coming with what you would call, I guess you could call a collaborator. Is that her name, Sister?
Yes, right.
Could you tell us just for a little bit, because you've heard him speak and I have not. It's called a workshop, but it may be called something else. But what would be the intent of Father Girzone and his collaborator in spending a couple of hours in Walpole with the people who would come to this workshop? What would they be trying to do?
Well, the purpose for, at least in my mind, the purpose for bringing Father Girzone and Sister Dorothy, the collaborator, to Walpole is an opportunity for people to come to a deeper understanding of who Jesus is, and obviously in understanding Jesus, coming to a deeper understanding of who God is and who we are in relationship to God. I feel that his presentation, at least the last time that I heard him speak, he has such a love for Jesus and such a sense of hope for the world and in terms of the gospel message that you can't help but be inspired by him. As you may know, the Catholic Church has developed this program called Prayer 2000, which is in preparation for the millennium, and the first year, which is this year here, is the focus is on Jesus himself. And in tune with that, I felt that bringing Father Girzone and having it sponsored by the Walpole clergy would enable peoples of different faith to come together and reflect upon the person of Jesus and our relationship to Jesus and to one another in the sense of the Walpole community.
So people who would come, and I believe it's November 13th on a Thursday night
That's
when
correct.
they'll be here. People coming November 13th, hearing Joe Girzone speak, perhaps he'll talk about the books, perhaps he'll talk about many things we're not aware of, but to share that, maybe a few hundred people come. My recollection, too, of events like this is that there's the benefit of hearing directly from an individual, perhaps whose books you've read, perhaps whose books you've heard about, but to hear in person the impact of an author. But then, more importantly, as we've been talking, I remember 15 years ago, or a long time ago, coming across the Joshua books. It was some time back for you, and you put them on a bookshelf and pull them back down again and so forth, or even as we're doing today, to talk about them and become refreshed, re-energized. One of the things I think that can be very critical for people is to attend an event, be inspired, but then somehow to allow that to really reshape their lives a little bit, and that's a challenge. So if it is the clergy in Walpole who are, which they are, sponsoring the event, then we have another challenge to kind of continue to keep it going.
That's right. It's like with the message of Jesus. It's one thing to listen to the message of Jesus. It's another thing to inflesh it, and that's the real challenge. Is to you don't have to accept everything that's being said to you, but at least ponder it. And if it strikes you as being the way to go, then let it take root, and then let it change your life. But as I said, I can remember being truly inspired by his last presentation. It was truly amazed because, as I said, that he can be controversial because he challenges, but he sticks to the person of Jesus. His mission in life is to, as he sent on his resume, is to present a portrait of Jesus so that we have a better picture in our minds and our hearts of who Jesus is. So probably to enable us to follow Jesus in a closer sense.
You mentioned earlier the scriptures, and as you were talking at one point, I was saying, gee, I'm always mindful of a couple of places in the scripture where the apostles, kind of grumbling sometimes to themselves about what they're hearing or not hearing, to be really next to you. Like, it's good to be here, but when the game is over, that's my phrase, when the game is over, can we be like right next to you?
Yeah.
And that's a sort of sense of being important.
Right.
And they felt that if Jesus is really doing these wonderful things now, when life is over, let's continue. We don't want to miss out on anything. And he turned to them and said that you've missed the point.
Right.
And I sort of translate that myself loosely in this conversation, but maybe for people, leaders, yourself and others in the community, after this lecture, would you see perhaps some ongoing discussion groups, or have you thought in terms of brainstorming some things that might take place afterwards to allow for the momentum to continue?
Well, at Blessed Sacrament, we have undertaken this Prayer 2000 program, and this is only one aspect of it. We have a couple of other lectures or presentations on Jesus this year, as well as we have a Lenten renewal and a day of prayer in January, which we hope to follow with small prayer groups. Again, to enable people to take time to be apart with God, to enable them to understand what God is in their lives and what He's done for them, and in a sense maybe where God is directing them. As far as working with the other churches, this is something that we really haven't discussed at this point. But if there are going to be changes within a church community or a town, then I think all peoples need a focal point. Peoples work best together when there's a focal point. If there's been a tragedy within a community and people are working to help a given family, that there's so many differences that are put aside for a time being. And if we can truly focus in on what Jesus is asking us, what God is asking of us, and really believe that in our heart, then we have reason and the means to establish a deeper sense of community. And I see this just as a place to start.
Right.
It's truly just a place to start. And although this program is 3 years, I mean, this is just a stepping stone too. It's only a means.
I think what you've said these last few minutes is really very critical, because when people as individuals find that there's a reason to reflect on what they're doing as individuals, it isn't just that they change, but there's an effect on someone else. And perhaps that effect on another person causes something else to happen, and all of a sudden,
that's right,
the world is changing. So that could be our hope and expectation.
Right, I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Father Tim, thank you for sharing this time with us and your impressions of these books. And we're hopeful that the community will benefit from reading the books and being with us on November 13th.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you,
Father
Mike.
Tim.
Right.
Okay.